Okay, 7th grade, we're back in our reading packet for today. We did skip ahead a little bit just because there's some random pages in there that we really can't do a whole lot with. So we did skip ahead. We're on page 34. So last time we talked about allusions and figures of speech and things like that. Today we're talking about comparing and contrasting different genres. So first, it's important to understand what a genre is. I think most of us probably know already. So a genre is like the type of category that the movie or the book or the story or the TV show or whatever is in. So, like a genre would be fiction, which would be that it's made up or not based on facts. Nonfiction would be that it is based on true events, it's all facts, a true story, that sort of thing. Then we have, genres can be a lot of different things, like just what the actual thing is focused on. So, like, crime would be a genre, horror is a genre, that sort of thing. And then we're talking about comparing and contrasting, which means looking at the things that are the same, which is comparing, and then looking at things that are different, which is contrasting. So if we look here, it says, have you ever seen a movie about an important part of history, such as the Civil Rights Movement, that includes fictional characters? This kind of movie is a work of historical fiction, or a story set in the past that combines made-up characters and events with historical figures and real events from a specific time or place. A historical account, on the other hand, is a factual explanation, description, or narrative from or about the past. All the people actually lived, the places existed, and the events in a historical account really occurred. So, historical fiction would be it's based on a true event, but the people in the story aren't real. Maybe the town isn't real, that sort of thing. So, there's a lot of different examples, especially in like movies, of historical fiction. So, like, anything based on some sort of event in history is likely historical fiction, unless it's a documentary. So, like, for example, there's like quite a few like 9/11 movies that aren't actually based completely on fact. Like, they kind of embellish it or put in some interesting stuff just to make it more interesting to watch, but it is based on the real events, but it's not completely factual to the real events. Now, a historical account would be more of like a documentary, that sort of thing. So it says, study the illustration below, which details are based on reality and which are fictional. So it says, I'm going to remember this moment forever, and it's a lady and then a guy. The guy, obviously, I think he's Martin Luther King before we even read anything else. I think that's MLK. We don't know who the lady is, but it says, the image above shows a real person, Martin Luther King Jr., standing next to a fictional character, a young woman who admires him. In a similar way, historical fiction includes real people and events and then alters some historical details to tell a made-up story. So study the chart to consider how the author of historical fiction draws upon real facts to create a work of fiction. So basically, what they're saying is in this cartoon, this event didn't necessarily happen. Now, obviously, Martin Luther King is a real person, and that's real, but we don't know that this woman is real. This is just kind of a little made-up storyline here, but it does include a real person, which is Martin Luther King. So it says how historical fiction uses history, and then how historical fiction alters history. This means changes history, or like writes their own fake story. So how do they use history? They set it in a real time period and place. They provide factual information, include events that already occurred, and uses historical figures, language, and details such as famous people or typical customs of the times. So, like, for example, here they're using history by putting in Martin Luther King here. And they're probably setting it in a real place and time, which is probably during the Civil Rights era. Okay, so the next one says, how does historical fiction alter history or change history? So the plot combines real and made-up events. Okay, so Martin Luther King obviously did exist, but this woman didn't necessarily exist. So that's combining real and made-up events. Made-up yet realistic characters interact with real people who once lived. That's exactly what's happening here. We have a made-up character interacting with Martin Luther King. It says most dialogue is invented. Because obviously when you're watching a movie about, World War II, for example, in the Holocaust, we don't know exactly the exact words all these people said, right? And that's what dialogue is. It's like people speaking to one another. So most dialogue, even in the most realistic and factual movies, is invented or made up because we don't know exactly what those people said word for word unless it was like in a speech or something like that. So then the last one says they may interpret or change historical details to create a better story. This is what I was talking about with the more entertaining, that sort of thing. Because if you're watching a documentary, you're watching that to like get information about the topic. So obviously you want everything to be factual. But if you're watching just a regular movie, then you're just wanting to be entertained. So they might add things to make it more entertaining. The last one says good readers. The last thing says good readers understand that historical accounts use facts and information to inform readers about history, while historical fiction is meant to entertain readers with an engaging story that combines real and imagined characters and events from the past. As they read, good readers are aware of these differences and carefully separate fact from fiction. So, we're going to move on to page 35, and we're going to do a little bit of practice on this. So, we're going to read a historical account, what's a historical account? Based completely on facts, right? Not historical fiction. We're reading a historical account about the Lewis and Clark expedition. So it says, Journey to the Pacific. In 1804, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark led the first U.S. expedition to the Pacific coast of North America. Sent by President Thomas Jefferson to chart a route through unexplored regions of the country, the team of explorers recorded the wide variety of plants, animals, and geography they saw in the wilderness. The expedition journeyed along rivers, over mountains, and through valleys for over a year, encountering hostile tribes, inclement weather, and challenging terrain. On November 7, 1805, the Corps of Discovery thought they had finally found the Pacific Ocean, but they were mistaken. The wide expanse of open water turned out to be the estuary or mouth of the Columbia River. With the help of native guides and determined companions, however, the team finally succeeded. The expedition reached the Pacific Ocean on November 15, 1805. A long, hard winter and return journey lay before them, but the first half of their mission had been accomplished. So now this says, explore how to answer this question. What characteristics of a historical account are present in this passage? So first we're going to look at this historical fact side because we have to read the other story to discuss the fictional detail side. So it says the historical account of Lewis and Clark's expedition includes many details about their journey, underline examples of facts, people, and places that present historical information. So let's go back in and highlight some of those things. So obviously we have in 1804, Meriwether Lewis and Clark led their U.S. expedition to the Pacific coast of North America. We have Thomas Jefferson is our president. On November 5th, the Corps of Discovery, they thought they found it, but then they didn't. But then they finally found the Pacific Ocean on November 15th, 1805. Okay, so we just highlight some important details in there. So, in this chart, you fill out the first column with facts. So we have, let me make this font a little bit smaller. We have Lewis and Clark on expedition to the Pacific. Oh, I can't spell. Pacific Ocean. We have that they reached it on November 15th, 1805. And we also have that Thomas Jefferson sent them on the expedition. Okay, so just some of the basic details of the story in here. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to read the fictional story, which is on the next page, on page 36, and then we're going to fill in the second column. So this is a historical fiction, which is based on true events, but has some different details. So what we're going to do is underline facts that are the same or similar, star any story elements that are clearly fictional, and then add them to the chart. So what we're going to do is we're going to highlight things that are clearly fictional, is what we're going to do here. So as the weary explorers reached the top of the hill, Mr. Lewis let out a cry of delight. "We've made it," he explained, "the Pacific." The men exchanged doubtful glances. Just last week, Mr. Clark had rejoiced along with the entire team, confident that the large wadi before them was the ocean. Well, if we look here, this saying, just last week, Mr. Clark had rejoiced along with the entire team, confident that the large body of water before them was the ocean. Because they say how they thought that it was the ocean before, but then it really wasn't. So it says, later they discovered that the body of water before them was just the estuary of the Columbia River. Yet they smelled ocean air. Peter had tried to stay positive as they continued their search, but it was extremely difficult. Would today, November 15th, actually be the day that they reached the Pacific Ocean? "That certainly is a sight for sore eyes," one of the men exclaimed, and Peter looked up and grinned. After a year and a half of traveling, they had, in fact, come upon the salt waters of the Pacific Ocean. So if we look here, we have this character, Peter. So I think we can say that Peter is probably more of a fictional character because he's going to be the narrator in this story. But he is a fictional character overall. Obviously, anytime where they're talking, this is going to be fiction because no one that was there is alive now. So we don't know exactly what words that they said. And I think another thing we could say is that they're talking about how they smelled ocean air. Because it doesn't mention that in the last story, and how do we know what they smelled unless that was written in a journal or something. So here on our chart, we'll go back and we'll put those fictional details. So we have fictional protagonist, which is Peter. We have dialogue, and then mention of smells, right? So now we are going to, we'll look at this questions at the bottom of page 36 here, and then you guys are going to do the next ones on your own. So let's take a look here. There we go. Which fact presented in Journey to the Pacific is also included in the fictional story above? So it says Peter played a key role as a member of Lewis and Clark's team. Well, it didn't mention anything about Peter in our initial story. As we said, Peter is a fake character. Some of the explorers felt the ocean was a sight for sore eyes. They didn't say that in the initial story. Like we said, the dialogue is mostly fake. Peter tried to keep his spirits up during the expedition when we already said that Peter is likely not real. Or the explorers had mistaken an estuary for the Pacific Ocean. Well, that's what we underlined, right? Because just the week before, they come across the estuary and they think that that is the Pacific Ocean, but it ends up not being the Pacific Ocean, so that is the story that we think is true. So now we need to describe how the author of Sighting the Pacific used and altered historical details about Lewis and Clark expedition to tell a story. So let's focus specifically on one part. So the author used, and then what was one element they used to make the story a little bit more interesting? Dialogue, right? Or speaking to one another. So dialogue to alter history in the story. They inserted conversations between people to make the story more interesting, but there is no proof of these conversations happening. So you're just describing how the second story used and altered the historical details to tell a more interesting story. Okay? So now you guys are going to move on and you're going to do pages 37 through 39 on your own. So you're going to do that. It asks you to read these two stories. One is a historical account, which is the first one. One is historical fiction, which is the second one, and then you will answer some questions about both of those. So you guys are completing 37 through 39 on your own, and then we'll move on to the other ones tomorrow, or on, I guess it won't be until Tuesday next week. But for now, you guys are just doing 37 through 39 on your own. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to help you.